Okay, so I'd like you to have a little look at this question. We've already had a look at one of the questions. So you can see at the top the extract question that you did the other day. We're not working on that one. Today we're going to look at this question. Now, you can see at the top of this paper it says to answer part A and either part B or part C. And I've actually highlighted that here again, either or. When you do the Of Mice and Men paper, do not answer both B and C. You must choose either B or C. Now, I know that that probably seems really obvious because it is actually printed on the paper, but you would be amazed at the number of people every year who do something mad and try to answer all the questions. So don't let that one be you. Let that be someone else. Don't let that be you. And instead, let's have a look at these questions. Now you can see that both B and C are worth the same number of marks. They're both the same amount difficult as each other. The only difference is going to be what you personally find easier. Now normally, I would say for you to pick the one that you think is easier, because they're both the same difficulty, they're both worth the same marks, but they're not both going to be the same difficulty to you. It depends what you've revised the night before, which is your favourite character, that's going to be the easier one for you. Make sure that you're happy with the one that you've picked before you start writing. Don't spend loads of time planning out a question, writing a question, and then deciding halfway through that you actually don't want to do that one. Today, though, we're going to do B instead of C for the pure reason that that way we can all do the same one. Okay? So we're going to have a look at that question together now. So looking at the question, you can see it's asking us to write about Curly and what he shows us about American society in the 1930s, and it asks us to think about these bullet points, which are very useful here. His position on the ranch, his relationship with his wife, his fight with Lenny, his behaviour at the end of the novel. Before we start writing, I want to point out that these bullet points are not everything. They're a prompt, but they're not a restriction. So if you can think of something that you'd rather write about that's not in these bullet points, you go right ahead. Now the question is quite nice in that it actually gives us our prompt. So we know that we need to write about Curly, and the examiners reminded us to think about American society in the 1930s. So we need to write about the context of American society in the 1930s. They have even reminded you that it is a novel so that you know that you need to write about Steinbeck and what Steinbeck has done. So they've given you some prompts in that question that tell you what you should be writing about, which is quite helpful, really. Now, you might be thinking about what you personally need to include. Basically, you need to make sure that you include quotations. For your exam, you have to learn those quotations by heart. You would not have the book with you in the exam. Fortunately, for right now, you definitely have a copy of the book, because even if you don't have one at home, we have got the full text linked on the Google Sites form, on the Google Classroom for our class. Also, you need to include the historical context. Now again, normally you would have to learn this by heart. However, you have the entire historical context lesson that we did last lesson available to you if you need it to help you, because this is a practice, this isn't the whole thing. You'd need to make sure that you include a clear explanation of every point that you make, and you need to be really explicit about it. You can't just assume that the examiner is going to work out what you mean. You have to state it to them. You have to tell them straight away. I would also recommend strongly starting with the author. So think about Steinbeck presents, Steinbeck creates, Steinbeck illustrates, Steinbeck implies. If you just keep starting with Steinbeck, it's going to force you to talk about the author's techniques, and that's what's going to get you marks. So what we've got here is a table that's going to help you to plan your response. This is pretty much exactly the table that I've attached to the lesson. I've just resized it a little bit so that it fits a little bit better in the video. Now you can see that it basically breaks down into 4 things: point, evidence, explanation, and a link to the context. Nice and easy. If you get all of these things in your answer, you will probably write quite a good answer. If we go back to the question and have a look, it actually tells us the first thing is his position on the ranch, but Curly's position on the ranch isn't a point by itself. We need to think about something to make it a point. So in this box, we might put something like Curly has a high status position on the ranch. That way we've actually got a point that we're arguing. Much better if your point is a clear, positive statement that you can back up or argue with. The next thing we need is some evidence. 99% of the time, that's going to be a quotation. So I'm going to pop some quotations in there. Now you're going to notice that the quotations that we've picked, they're not very long, but they give us something that we can talk about, and they give us somewhere that we can start to twist this information and look for something in it. Now you can see I haven't actually analysed both of those quotations. I've chosen to just go for the boss's son for now. And notice how the explanation has made that so much longer. The explanation should be the biggest part of your answer. That is where the biggest part of the marks are going to come from for you. So we've put here the boss's son as our quotation to say it's a high status position. And then we've said, as the boss's son clearly feels immune to some of the pressures of the ranch, he knows he won't get canned. And we've put that other quotation in there just because if you can put a quotation in and you know it and it's only a couple of words, you might as well. However, the possessive apostrophe is on bosses. Can you see how we've gone for a language technique here? We're looking specifically at how Steinbeck has written this. Now this is pretty good, but can you see how in my answer I haven't actually said Steinbeck? If I said Steinbeck has put the possessive apostrophe on bosses, that would have been a much better answer. In fact, let's change that now. So much the better. So now we've got the author here, Steinbeck has placed the possessive apostrophe on bosses, showing that the power isn't really Curly's but is borrowed from his father. So we're starting to see a bit more detail in how this high status is actually being expressed in the novel. Now that last thing that we've got to do is we've got to link it to context. So we're going for a bit of context here. In the 1930s is always a great way to start off your context because it just proves you know which decade we're talking about. And the Great Depression, remember with those capitals, always another great way to introduce the context because again it shows you know what's going on. It created a difficult economic situation. Can you see how I haven't said any specific details? I don't need to. I could get an A star without ever mentioning a number from the Great Depression. What I need to do though is link it to the explanation, to the point and the evidence that I've just made. So, linking it to Curly here, it was very hard to find or keep a job. Curly's lucky because he's got a secure job through his father, but he's trapped because he's got a secure job through his father, but that doesn't mean that he'll get another secure job because it's very difficult to get a job in the Depression. There are bad labour conditions of the time, another very useful phrase, because it links you back to the historical context. And then this might explain some of his anger. Even though he's got this high status position, Curly is angry. This also then links me on so I can start to talk about Curly's anger. Perhaps in my next paragraph, I might discuss his relationship with his wife, or I might discuss the way that he treats Lenny. So it gives you somewhere to move to and to talk about. So pulling back for a second to the essay that you're going to write after you've planned this, remember that you need to include quotations, historical context, a clear explanation, and think about the author in your answer. We're looking for that to be 8 paragraphs long. Now, normally you would take 40 minutes in an exam to write this at the answer to this question. Obviously, you might want to take a little bit more time in your own time. It's the first one that you've done. That's fine. But in an exam situation, about 5 minutes a paragraph would lead you to about 8 paragraphs in 40 minutes. And you're looking for about 20 marks. So you're looking for getting a mark every 2 minutes. Not at all bad and something that you can definitely achieve. That being the case, have a look at the attachments for the lesson. If you're not sure how to proceed, by all means, feel free to contact me. And good luck.